The honourable member for Cape Breton-Richmond.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, et merci, Monsieur le Président. I'd like to actually speak in broader terms about this bill, so I promise you that I won't go line for line. And because, as one of my colleagues did mention, that the primary focus, and I guess we would call it in some aspects the end audience or the end user are the children. And that's why we should all be here and should be our focus are the children in this province. I thank the constituents of Cape Breton-Richmond for giving me this opportunity to speak toward Bill 72, an act to reform the administration on the public education system. And many people in my constituency know that I usually speak off the cuff more often than with notes. And I got some good advice to speak from the heart, speak on their behalf, and make sure that all of our collected voices were heard here in the legislature, so I'll try my best to do that today. I'm a proud Canadian and a proud Nova Scotian, but I'm especially a proud Cape Bretoner, born and raised, and I certainly believe in this province, and I believe in the people of this province, and I certainly also believe, most importantly, in our democratic system. Moi, j'étais une petite fille sur l'île Madame qui était née dans une communauté acadienne. Et puis, mes parents parlaient français à la maison lorsque ma langue maternelle, c'était le français. Et quand j'ai commencé l'école, je ne pouvais presque pas parler anglais du tout. C'était tout en français. Mais l'anglais était la langue utilisée pour m'enseigner dans une école anglaise provinciale. So, what I've just said, for those of you who maybe didn't understand, is that I did grow up in an Acadian community. I am Acadian, and my first language is, in fact, French. But I had the misfortune, I will say, to have been to go to basically a provincial school system at that time that was administered all in English. So you can imagine a little French kid who couldn't barely speak English, English at the time, except for a few words from Sesame Street and Mr. Dressup, is put into a grade primary, and basically you quickly become an English speaker. So I'm very proud to be able to utilize my French language as much as possible, but as you can tell, I don't have a French accent any longer. Several generations of French children, actually, in my community were taught in English, in the English language in the provincial school system. And so it's very difficult, in fact, for many of these people to speak French. And so I really understand the importance of reform to education. Reform was needed in my community and across this province, which came in the way of French immersion in the public school system, but it also came in the way of something that I'm so proud of, which is le Conseil scolaire acadien provincial. And so my generation of people, my generation, my colleagues, my community, for those of us that went to school in English, my son then, many generations later, was able to go to school in French, and so he is completely bilingual, and for that I'm very grateful. I went to school in Almadam, and on Almadam we take voting very seriously. I don't think there's any voter apathy, actually, in Cape Breton-Richmond, period. In fact, I think we had one of the highest voter turnouts in the province, which I'm also very proud of. So when we talk about school boards and the dissolution of school boards in my communities in particular, I think perhaps it hits at home a little bit differently, Mr. Speaker, because we've always had very active school boards in the Straits Regional School Board. And even before that, when I was a child, I remember my school board representatives very, very fondly. I would like to say that as much as I understand that there were a lot of people that were appointed to school board positions, I think it was 67%, a lot of those positions were held by women. And we always talk about the importance of gender parity in politics, and I just feel that this has really taken away and obviously this legislation has taken away an opportunity for women to actually become involved in politics at a very local level. And there's still very many barriers, obviously, to women getting involved in politics. Many women are at home taking care of families, and so they need to get involved in politics at a much more local level. So it would be, I would be remiss not to mention that I believe that an important part of our democratic process has been taken away with the dissolution of the school boards, not to mention the way that the decision-making process occurred to actually dissolve the school boards. I believe I said the other day it was kind of done with a stroke of a pen and overnight, and it would have been, I would have preferred to see that perhaps those voices wouldn't have been struck out quite so quickly, and I'm sure that there's others across this province that feel the same. Now, when it comes to the school boards, we do have obviously a great deal of representation both from women, and we do have some amazing men. One man who was on the school board recently was a former mathematics teacher in Richmond, and was one of my math teachers in high school and had a huge influence in my life, as did many other teachers on Isle Madame. And they had positions of trust within the community, and I understand as well that the advisory councils, the school advisory councils obviously have positions of trust as well. With the advisory councils taking over where the school board really has left off, it's worrisome to me, and I think for other people that have come forward to speak with me, that the advisory councils don't really have a set rule of governance. And so there's a lot of gray area about how people's local voices are going to be heard on local issues regarding education. I know that there's a financial challenge, and obviously we have a fiscal responsibility as elected officials to make certain that we stretch a penny 4 ways as much as possible. And so I understand that reform was needed in our education system. The reform that's really being spoken about here today in the form of Bill 72 has come out of a report by a very highly esteemed woman, Dr. Avis Glaze, but it's really, I feel, a Made in Ontario report. I always find it a bit astounding how we don't seem to have, in many cases, or we feel that we don't have the correct skill set or experience in our own province to be able to hire consultants who are from Nova Scotia and for Nova Scotia. And I'd really like to see more of that. With the report as well having been put forward is basically done, everything was said and done within 11 weeks, and with a large price tag of obviously $75,000. It was an awful quick turnaround to such an important process that will affect teachers, administrators, parents, and most importantly, children for years to come. You know, it's not often that legislation like this in the form of 60 pages comes across our desks. There are a lot of changes here, but a lot of the changes that are being put forth are not really focused on reforms in the classrooms, which I know we're all talking about and we're all very concerned about, but more so really reform on an administrative level. And I think that the people in this province, and particularly in my constituency, really want to see us focusing on reforms in the classroom, positive changes in the classroom. And as much as I know that the government likes to remind us on more than one occasion to try to be more positive as opposition, our job, obviously, as opposition members is to keep the government to account. And it's hard to sometimes find ways to actually say those things in a positive manner. I try my best to do so, but it's not always sunshine and roses, as we would say at home. We know that, obviously, with the new legislation that's coming up, we're looking at an amalgamated school board system. We're looking at an elected process, democratic process, that's really no longer available on a local level. And those elected voices are being replaced with what I think we've called, or I've heard it called, independently appointed council members, advisory council members. I don't think that independently and appointed ever actually should exist in the same sentence, especially not in politics, because we know that appointments, unfortunately, usually are not objective, but are usually very subjective. And that's why we have democracy. We have democracy to protect ourselves from just having a one-sided viewpoint. We have democracy so that people can come forward and make decisions about who they feel is best to represent their voice in this House. And there's only 51 of us here, obviously, that get an opportunity to do that. As well, I think that we're in a crucible moment, very transformative moment when it comes to our educational system in this province. And I don't deny that we are in need of changes. We are in need of reform, especially in the classrooms. But I would urge the government to really focus in, and please, I don't mean this disrespectfully, but for lack of a better term, not focus in so much on union busting, but really focus in on classroom reforms and focus in on the children that really need our assistance. You know, I was one of those kids at one time. We were all one of those kids at one time. If you grew up in Nova Scotia, whether in an urban environment or rural environment, we all went through the same provincial school system. If you're of a certain age group, like I am. And again, it's lovely that we have choices, especially those of us who are protected now, as the Acadian school boards are under the Charter of Rights and Freedom. But not all of us, you know, have those same, are protected underneath the same system. So I guess I don't want to take too much time on this, but what I would really like to say, Mr. Speaker, is that I certainly hope that with teachers being so tired of being put down, so tired of fighting, so tired of not having the needed resources that they so duly deserve in their classrooms, and really trying to let their voice be heard in extraordinary ways that we've seen them mobilize in the last year, and I'm so proud of them all for doing that. That's truly democracy in action as far as I'm concerned. I really truly feel that that I wish that we will really focus in on what the Honourable Minister has said with teaching excellence, leadership excellence, high standards. I think that those are all really very important things to have in our classrooms and in our schools. But with leadership, we all know that it starts from the top. And we need to show these children that we're doing what's best for them as a whole. And if there's any of them listening to me today, I hope that they can understand in the terms that I'm speaking. Leadership includes inclusion. It's not about exclusion. It should be inclusive of everyone. It's important to follow through, I understand, on promises that we make to our constituents, and in your platform goals, I know that it's important for, obviously, the government to follow through on those, but it's not so important that it should be at the expense of silencing the voices of the people who represent and work with the very children for whom we should all be focused. And it's important not to follow through without fair and completely consultative processes. And it's important, Mr. Speaker, that government, no matter who is in power, never tries to skew the end results. Leadership is about consultation, Mr. Speaker. It's not about elimination. So with that said, I was going to talk about, the healthcare crisis, but I'll leave that one alone. I think we'll save that for another day. I'll close it with basically just saying I think I'm very familiar with the concept of decisions being imposed upon a people. I think in general, any Acadian that's in the province probably has as part of their cellular DNA still memories of Le Grand Dérangement, and otherwise known as the expulsion of the Acadians. So I agree that our education needs reform. I'll say it again. But I strongly believe that we do not conform simply because we feel like it is un fait accompli, comme on dirait en français. We must continue to fight for democracy, because through democracy we decide our children's future. And we must continue to fight for classroom reforms, because our teachers and our children need our support. And we must continue to fight for our administrators, because as much as our government would like to make us believe that administrators are managers, well, Mr. Speaker, administrators are teachers too. We must continue to fight and resolve the issues that hold our children back from achieving their excellence in learning, and let us all stay focused on empowering our teachers and our children. Let us not break teachers down, as has been the case for far too long now. They're wonderful people. They deserve to be nurtured, valued, and properly supported, as do our children. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.